it's a place where I can say with conviction, no, actually, you can do this because I have done it. And I understand what it feels like to be so angry that you can't hold on to this. I understand what it feels like when your pants are tight. Like it's the sublime and the ridiculous.
Kathryn, quick, welcome to the Uncovery podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. We have so much to talk about. And it's so good to see you because we've had this ongoing peer mentor relationship for a couple of years, but as these
Mhm.
things sort of transpire over time, our relationship has kind of shifted too. So we'll get into all of that. But right off the top, I just want to give you the chance to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Cool, I will. My name's Kathryn. I'm currently living in Haliburton, Ontario. I spent 13 years living in Calgary, where I got involved with Silver Linings. And 2 years ago, actually last weekend, we moved back to Ontario. And I'm currently working for the local hospital foundation as a donor relations manager. And so healthcare is kind of my thing. Living outside of the city is kind of turning out to be my thing. So it's a really interesting stage of life for me.
Oh, amazing. And so we know each other through Silver Linings. Maybe you can tell me sort of a bit about your background and how you came to be involved in Silver Linings.
Sure. Um, I actually applied for an admin position at Silver Linings, and Sandrine, the board chair and founder, she said to me, we've chosen someone else for the role, but would you sit on the board? And so it was a really symbiotic relationship for me to sit on that board, because for me it was an opening of my outward recovery to the world. So that was I think it's about 5 years ago now that I got involved with Silver Linings as a board member. And that was the first time I really spoke to people that I really didn't know about having an eating disorder when I was younger. And I got really excited when Sundream brought forward the idea of peer mentorship, because for me, that was something that I wished I'd had when I was going through my recovery process so many years ago. So that's kind of how I got connected with Silver Linings. But then it's really allowed me to become much more of an advocate for the eating disorder community and mental health support in general.
Amazing. Yes. And that was like how we kind of kicked off our relationship. I wonder if taking a step back, maybe you can tell me a little bit about your own eating disorder journey. Um, and then maybe why it kind of took you until the Silver Linings opportunity to be more public and open about it.
Sure. Um, so I had an eating disorder from the time that I was 16 till about 32, and I'm 61 now. So I've been in recovery for a long, long time. And my eating disorder journey started out in a very weird way. I thought I was the only person in the world who had an eating disorder. I didn't even really know what it was. And the way I told my parents, my little coming out story to my parents, was there was an article in the Globe and Mail about a therapist in Toronto who was specializing in eating disorders. And I opened the paper and I put a note on it, left it for my parents, and I said, "This is me." And that's how I did it. And they were flummoxed. We didn't know about mental health back then. I mean, of course, it existed, mental health therapy and counseling and stuff, but it was nowhere near what it is now. And so the awareness wasn't there, and the resources weren't there. I did connect with that therapist that was in the paper, I worked with her for a couple of years and kind of got well enough, but not really. And then I went back and worked with another therapist to my full recovery when I was about 28. And then I think between 28 and 32, I was still solidifying that
Mm,
recovery. And, but then I found the next few decades were uh, not not easy either because we live in a very fat phobic diet culture world. And so I felt like I was silently battling those things um, in the background when I would be out for lunch with my girlfriends and they'd say, "Oh, do you want to split a sandwich?" And I'd be like, "Split a sandwich? No, that's not good for me. I need the whole sandwich." Right? So
yeah.
innocuous, but that was so triggering for me. So then it was the silver linings thing. And that's when I was able to say, like, "Oh, I'm recovered. This is my experience, and I'm here to tell about it."
Mm, which is so powerful. And I mean, for me, and this people, if they've listened, will know well that the reason that I think that recovery has been as sustainable for me in this go around as it has been is because of being public with it, is because
Yes.
of holding myself accountable, not just to myself and my team, but to be very open with everybody else about this is what it's like and this is what I'm going through and I am making the steps because it would be impossible for me to look at myself in the mirror if I wasn't walking the walk as I was talking the talk. And so I wonder if that resonates at all with, I mean, I realize you've been in sustained recovery for so long. What does it feel like now to be a person with like 30 years of recovery under your belt?
Um, well, first of all, the first point to your point about being public is that eating disorders thrive in isolation, right? So, yeah. So it's really important to have that community where you can be truthful and truthful with yourself first and foremost, and then the other the other feeling of being truthful to the outside world. So to be in recovery, and I'll reiterate this diet culture world we live in, it's hard because the messages are still you're still bombarded no matter how much in recovery you are. You're still bombarded with these messages that want to take you out of recovery all the time. And so the I think one of the beautiful things about being a mentor was that it reinforced my recovery because it made it so important for me to help you or to help my other mentees stay the course, learn how to ignore those messages, learn how to fight the demons that want to take you over there again. And so for me, it's these past, I guess it's been only 2 years, right? Because I think you were my first mentee.
2 years,
Um,
exactly 2 years, almost probably to the day.
Wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, they've been my most interesting recovery period for me. And most not sustained because it's not about behaviors, it's about thoughts and courage and allyship and being fierce in
Mm,
my advocacy and fierce in my boundaries.
amazing. Yes. Can you tell me and really tell the listeners, because I know this, but tell me a little bit about what it is to be a peer mentor. What is the peer mentorship program? What's its purpose? And what is your role as a mentor?
I think it's a safe place. It's a safe place for someone to come to bring everything that is them as a person who lives with an eating disorder, where there is no judgment, there's no surprises, there's no shock, there's no shame. And I think that is the thing that when I think about some of the stories that my mentees have told me, and it's like I feel like there's no reaction in my face because I have no reaction because nothing surprises me. Uh, and so it's a safe place for those stories, those emotions, those doubts, the raging against recovery. It's a safe place because I've been there. So for someone who's even working really closely with the recovery team, for someone who's been through all of those emotions and stages and fought it, it's a place where I can say with conviction, no, actually, you can do this because I have done it. And I understand what it feels like to be so angry that you can't hold on to this. I understand what it feels like when your pants are tight. Like it's the sublime and the ridiculous of eating
Yes.
disorders, right? It's the little things like your waistband, or the big things like how do I live like this? How do I go to a social event? What happens when I get invited to a buffet? All of these logistical things that we can talk about in a safe, non-judgmental, no shame, no shame. I
Mhm.
think, I think that's the biggest thing. It's like we can talk about all the ugly things that happen around eating disorders
Yeah.
without shame.
It's profound as a concept. And I always sort of wondered when I was in kind of recovery the first time, let's call it, I always wondered why we didn't have more access to a resource like somebody that has actually been through it. Because the thing about
Hmm.
eating disorders, like you said, not only do they thrive in isolation, but they also thrive in this uniqueness fallacy. This, I am the only one that's ever had these thoughts. I am the only one that does these crazy things, that thinks these crazy things.
Hmm.
And as much as our families and our loved ones and our friends and our partners and our therapists and our dietitians and our whatever, our doctors, as much as they want to understand, can empathize, they will, unless they've had lived experience, never actually really understand that voice in my head the way that you, Kathryn, does. They will
Exactly.
never be able to because they just haven't been there. And you have to have kind of gone through the weeds, not only to be able to say, yes, Maddie, those are normal thoughts. Yes, I've had those too, but
Hmm.
also you can do this. And I am living proof. There are so few people willing to lend their voice to that perspective of, I came all the way through this and you can recover. You absolutely can because I did. And here's how. Without that, I actually don't know how anybody recovers. Like the fact that so many people can recover without that sort of peer mentorship or being able to see themselves in another person, it's such an enhancement to anyone's recovery journey. So
Hmm.
it's been a profound piece. And so I was so thrilled when I saw it come up through Silver Linings 2 years ago at the exact same time that I was kind of like hitting rock bottom and bouncing off of it, was the exact time that this program kind of came into existence. And I was like, yes, thank God. Because it does, like you said, it felt like a safe space to be like, okay,
Hmm.
she's definitely going to not think that I'm totally nuts. And like, you know, in a world where we basically seek professional mentors and coaches for all kinds of different aspects in our lives, like,
Hmm.
why do you think that we have been so slow to adopt this concept for our mental health? Not even just eating disorders, but just mentors in mental health.
I think it's founded in shame because you have to be very comfortable. And I give you a huge amount of credit because you out yourself
Mm,
on your podcast. And I know you do it in person. You've done it on calls with me, but you have to be very confident and very have strong convictions to be able to do that. And so when someone has lived with depression or lived with other mental illnesses, um, it takes a it takes a long time to get to that point where you can speak about it and not get drawn back into it. And it's a choice. And I want to say too that you came to this with me kicking and screaming. You put me through my paces. You really did because you were like, "Are you sure?" I don't know. And I remember your questions to me were really funny because I was always like, oh, here comes a question. You'd be like, how did you feel when X, Y, or Z happened? Like, how did you feel when you were 2 months into recovery? And, like you were, as a scientist, you wanted details, you wanted data, and you wanted it proven. And I was like, and then every once in a while, you cut me some slack and you say, I know it was a long time for you. long time ago for you. But yeah, you put me through my paces because it's really hard to extricate yourself and to really feel confident because all of these other things I've worked to you for so long.
Yeah.
So it takes
Yeah.
courage and it takes tenacity and it takes resilience and it takes like uh you have to take the risk. You have to take
Yeah.
the risk on yourself.
It is. It's a risk. The self-disclosure thing, I think for many, many people is really difficult. I
Yeah.
have become well practiced at it just because I've been doing it for a long time, but I wasn't
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
And that type of self-disclosure with the darkest things that you've ever thought about yourself or the world is a
Hmm.
very vulnerable position at the beginning. But it's also a really vulnerable position. And you bring this up, and it's so funny because, like, yes, I remember our entire journey together, but I also know that I was very cognitively not all there probably in the beginning, if I think about it now, because although I felt like I was very functioning and very
Yeah.
normal, I was completely undernourished. So there's no way that, like, I was in brain fog. I forget certain periods of time during that,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
do know that what I craved and what I think a lot of people crave is answers to hard questions. And the answers, unfortunately, and what I know now is like the answers are nearly impossible to give to an exact, accurate
Hmm.
point. I
Hmm.
can't ask you, Kathryn, even as badly as I wanted to, and I did, when will this stop? When
Yeah.
will this feeling go away? When will I stop feeling this way? When do the night sweats
Yep.
stop? When does this discomfort in my body stop? When do I normalize
Hmm.
my eating patterns? When, and how? And that must be challenging as a peer mentor to not be able to give those questions that these people, because they know that you've been there, they're like, you're my only hope for getting an answer to
Hmm.
this, basically.
Hmm.
What is
Hmm.
that like to try and navigate those really impossible questions and conversations?
I think storytelling and self-disclosure. That was the best. That's the best tool for me because it's not me telling you what your experience is going to be. It's what my experience was. And so many times I will get a question and I'm like, yep, that exactly happened to me. And this is how I ran through it. And this is what the end was for me. This is what the resolution was for me. And so that storytelling piece and being very, very comfortable with self-disclosure and very comfortable with being vulnerable. And it's really hard because you're two strangers. It's not like you met at school or met at work and you're kind of hanging out and you're like, hey, I've been dealing with this. Me too. It's like we get matched up based on some data
Mm,
and some responses to questions. And then we have to build trust really fast to make it work for both of us, right? Because I want to feel that I'm being helpful and
mhm.
you want to feel that this is worth your time. And so it takes a lot of trust from both sides of the table to be able to do that, to say, to get to the point where you say, like you did, I need someone who can coach me through this. And I'm going to be there, you know, everything naked and available so that this person can see how they can help me, how they can reflect back to me. And you did
Mm, yeah,
from
yeah,
the very beginning.
yeah. It's a leap, and that trust bridging, how do you do that? Because I imagine that, like, not everybody is ever going to be a peer mentor. Not everybody that's gone through an eating disorder is going to want to do this. But even
Yeah.
people that want to be able to increase trust between them and someone that's going through it, or them and someone that's going through something else, how do you sort of bridge that trust? You mentioned storytelling, and I think that that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. So maybe, yeah, maybe we can start there.
Yeah. Uh, I always start with vulnerability. I always feel like the best way that I can connect with someone is by showing my own vulnerability, and I'm very comfortable with that. I do that at work. I do that with my kids, and so I'm very comfortable telling the story of what happened to me. What happened to me in a situation? Um, what my family background. You and I have talked about family, and some similarities there. And it's really important because I have a lot of, when I look backwards, I see the story evolving. I have insight of being a lot further down the years where I see, oh, that's how this became my story.
Mm.
So putting the pieces together and being able to see, make connections to other people's stories and the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. And it, I mean, I guess over time, right, that sort of storytelling unpacks both ways, which actually just
Mhm.
brings the relationship closer and closer and closer. Because as somebody going through it is coming out of it, the things that we're processing in therapy, for example, sometimes has to do with insights about our families, about our past, about our childhoods, about our histories. And these stories come through, and then we almost bring them to the peer mentor relationship as this extra reflection point of here's what I'm talking about. And then that gives you the opportunity to say, yes, here's how it was for me, which just increases that
Exactly.
over time. So this beautiful sort of parallel track between your sort of call it traditional therapeutic methods and traditional eating disorder recovery resources paired with this incredible supplement of peer mentorship. And it's almost like it would be incomplete without both, is my opinion today.
Mhm.
What do you think are some of the sort of key challenges and breakthrough moments that happen throughout the peer mentorship process with someone, either with me or with any of your mentees?
Mm. Um, One of them, the moments is when, let's say it's August and you're battling through something with your mentee, and they're saying this is happening and this is happening, and I'm able to say, yeah, I remember going through that experience, and then maybe 2 or 3 months down the road, I remember thinking, oh, I don't feel that way anymore, and so they come back to me in September and they go, you were right.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's a huge celebration because it's like a stamp of approval. It's a huge milestone for them, but it's also like, what else have you got for me?
Yes.
Like, give
Yes.
me
Because we're
another milestone of
validating
hope.
it. We're
Yeah,
validating it over time. You're saying,
yeah,
just hang in there. Know that this comes to an end. It's going to happen. And then it happens. And they're like, it happened. I believe you. Not that I didn't trust you before, but I had my doubts. And now I'm really even more bought in. And it's almost like it
exactly.
gives fuel to the recovery then to be able to do
It
that.
does. It
Yeah.
does. And it takes a while to get a few of those like little notches.
Yeah.
And then you're like, you're on a roll. Then you're like, okay, I got this. Like I've got hope and I've got momentum.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
What
Yep. That's
about
one of my favorites.
that's such a good, and that's such a good example too. Um, I do wonder also what kinds of really difficult, challenging conversations, challenging points in a peer mentor mentee journey have come up.
Mm, resistance.
Mm.
Um, when you spend a lot of time talking to someone and you just you don't believe they're hearing you.
Mm.
And so, you can only say the same thing or reframe it or switch it up so many times until you feel like I can't unlock this for you. And as because it's not a therapeutic relationship and it's very important to maintain that, I can't necessarily say like what I want to say,
Oh.
to help somebody, or because I don't want to psychobabble them, like I
Mhm.
don't want to do what my therapist has said to me. And this might be confusing, like as an answer, but you can't say what you want to say because you have to not go over that boundary.
Right. You have to stay in your
And
lane as a mentor instead of a
yeah,
therapist. Even though you know all the therapy speak, you actually probably do know the answer.
yep,
It's such
yep,
an interesting role as a peer mentor. It really is, because no matter how much you know, no matter how many, like, I don't know, like, I'm going to be a peer mentor. I have a psych degree and a behavioral science degree. Like, I know some of this
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
right? But I'm
yeah.
still not going to be able to really cross over that line into therapist, because that's a
Hmm.
distinct role.
Hmm. Yep. And so sometimes your mentee will bring you something from therapy, and so you have to say, okay, what does this mean as a mentor? Because
Right.
we're not talking about science. We're just talking about, okay, how did you feel when your therapist said that to you, and how did I feel, or how would, bashing back and forth some ways that you could go back to your therapist and say, give me clarification on this or whatever, more like a friend would kind
Yeah.
of help you through the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that that brings up an interesting point that I did want to discuss too, which is about this idea of safety in the mentor mentee relationship, as well as autonomy. Because I think one of the most beautiful things about the peer mentor program is that it's much more self-led and self-guided by the mentee, by the person with the eating disorder, than most other forms of recovery resource that they may be accessing. Even if a person chooses themselves to go into recovery and really try and go to their
Mhm,
appointments and do these things, there are many, many cases where they feel compelled to go to their therapist. They feel
mhm,
compelled to go to their dietitian, and they might not really want to, but they have
mhm,
to. They feel like they have to in order to go through the motions of recovery. Whereas with mentorship, even inherent to the way the agreement is formed between the mentee and the mentor at the beginning, it's
mhm,
entirely up to the mentee to kind of guide how often, how much. Like, it's a collaborative process that they get to guide. They're not getting told by their treatment team, you have to go to your therapist every week. You have
mhm,
to see your dietitian twice a week. You have to go to your doctor every 2 weeks. Those things are very prescribed in recovery. But this autonomy that someone can have in the mentorship community, I think that that's a huge enhancement to making someone feel like they're choosing recovery. But I'm
yeah,
interested in your thoughts.
absolutely. I have, mm, 5 mentees, I think.
Oh my
One's kinda dropping off. I
gosh.
know, I know. Well, there's a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they're all very different in how they wanna access me, and so I leave it wide open, sometimes I have to say no because it's not convenient, but, for some, they wanna know when their next meeting is. For some, they wanna not have a next meeting, but wanna reach out when they need something. And I always leave it open. You can text me anytime. If it's a red hot emergency, I'm here. But I think that's really, really important because there's no financial, and I think that's really important. There's no financial consequence to them missing an appointment or not staying, every 2 weeks or whatever. So you're not coming there with nothing. But at the same time, when they booked appointment with me, booked a meeting time with me, I know that most of my mentees say, "Oh, I was thinking about what I was going to bring today." So they are driving it. It's not. I don't have an agenda. I don't know what they're going to come with. It could be a good day. It could be a bad week.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a beautiful thing that they just come and it's like, um, I don't know. It's like a friend. It's like a friend with benefits of a different type.
It is. It totally is. And I think that that actually makes it makes all the difference too, as a mentee who's been through it, is that there's this thing where when you're talking to friends or even family or people in your life, it goes beyond sort of like they'll never really fully understand. That's part of it. But also you end up in some cases we end up feeling a little bit like a burden, or a little bit like, oh my God, do I ever stop talking about this? Like, this is all I
Mhm,
talk about. This is all that I'm going through. And this is all that I'm bringing to any
mhm.
relationship that I have.
Yep.
Like, I don't feel like I want to. It's not even that I don't feel like I could. I feel like I could talk to my best friends and my family about, my
Mhm,
recovery all of the time, but I
mhm,
don't want to. I don't want to feel
mhm,
like I'm always just banging on about this. And so the mentor becomes this, it's like a friend. that not like that has to be your friend and listen to you, but it's what their role is. Like the
Yes.
relationship is designed to be that sounding board. So
Yeah.
it alleviates at least a certain amount of that sort of guilt about overtaking, with
Yep.
your own story and your own struggles and things like that. But I mean, I even found in our sort of ongoing relationship too, that from time to time I would have to sort of check myself where I wouldn't be like, oh, I don't want to bother Kathryn. Like
Yeah.
Kathryn's role is to help you, like you're being an insane person, but this sort of like, oh, well, I really don't want to weigh too much on my mentor. So like,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and it's so true because I think with your parents, for instance, they always want to know that you're feeling better. So you have to kind of take that to them, you know? But with a mentor, you could just show up how you are on that day. And it doesn't send me off into a tailspin like, oh my God, this is terrible. She's having a bad day. I'm like, she came to me and she's having a bad day. And and I think about you after the meeting, but I don't worry because
Mm,
I know you have a team. And so I think it's a really good way that you can just show up however you are on that day, and you don't have to worry about wearing that person out.
yeah.
I love it. I love that part of it.
How do you make sure that you aren't worrying and taxing yourself and taking care of yourself as a mentor when you're working with mentees? And so many mentees in your case, that you're not holding their stories and their struggles at the detriment to your own well-being. How do you manage that?
I've actually never thought about that way, Maddie, because I've never felt it.
Mm,
Because I consider them to be my friends, and they have to do the work. I
mm,
can't do it for them. So I gave them some tools or some thoughts or some, revised perspectives, and then it's up to them to take it away and do what they can with that. I can't do the work for them.
yeah.
I didn't feel that obligation.
Wow. That's such a
Yeah, it sounds
strength of
hard.
mindset. It's such a strength of mindset to be like, I'm not going to take on all of this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably also a byproduct of probably the types of mentees that you have. You can imagine a situation where people would really need a lot more support than a mentor is willing
Yes.
to give.
Yes.
And then that would kind of have to be sort of its own journey and discussion to make sure that there are things like boundaries in place, that a mentor is taking care of themselves, that they know that they're not on a 24/7 call line for emergencies, no
Yeah.
matter how generous you are with your
Yeah.
availability, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think in terms of the mentee intake process, there has to be an assurance that that person is ready and well enough and willing to do the process. Like you can't, it's not possible if somebody is that unwell that you
Yeah.
worry about their life or death situation. That's not a mentee um, possibility.
Right. Yeah. And knowing, and probably, and I think this is part of the intake process, if I'm not mistaken, but like, I think that it's a requirement that you actually have to be seeing like a therapist and other
Yes,
resources as well. Like, you can't just go from, I have an eating disorder, I want to go into recovery, so I'm just going to have a peer mentor. Like, that's
that's
not,
right.
because then obviously all of that falls to the peer mentor, and that's completely unfair. So I think the way the
That's right.
programs are structured inherently prevents that sort of way too much
Yes,
weight on way too small a surface area.
that's right. And we have check-ins. So when we do our notes back to the foundation, if there's anything to worry about, then there's a process for that. So it's not on
Mm,
the mentor.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a process so that that mentee can be contacted by somebody else or take it to the next step. Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone is thinking about becoming a peer mentor, let's go with that one first.
Hmm.
Someone is thinking about becoming a peer mentor, or they've heard about this, or they're just hearing it for the first time. They know they've had experience with an eating disorder, and they're not sure whether or not like it's right for them, but they're considering it. What would you tell them?
my learning was that it made me have stronger conviction in my own recovery. So it's a win. Like it's not only giving back, but it's really a huge um, input to the mentor. But I would say make sure that you have that boundary, that you're able to say, this is not my work to do, so that you've got enough space between you and your own eating disorder, that you have that conviction. Um, and look at it as building a community for yourself, because you will connect with other mentors. So you share other experiences, and that that feels good to know that you're not alone, and to know that you're leaving a mark in a positive way. For me, it was connecting with other people who also had the same sadness about what they missed out on in their life by giving so much of it to an eating disorder.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Where you kind of felt that come up? Was it with the mentees that you were talking to, or with other mentors?
It's something that I feel as a mentor, and I could see it in the other mentors, but it's something that I shared with my mentee, was the grief that I had for the life that I gave away to an eating disorder, like the years that I gave away to it. And I didn't want other people to live with that 30 years down the road. Because I still am sad about that. I still missed a large part of my 20s, like good things in my 20s, because I was so consumed with disordered eating and trying to live with it.
Mhm.
And so I still have grief for that. And I don't want anybody else to feel that. And so when we met with the mentors as a group online, always online, but you could see it in other people, that conviction that they didn't want somebody else to have to live with what they had to live with,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sadness.
And if people are in it and they have the eating disorder, you want to be able to allow people to extract themselves from it as soon as humanly possible, to
Yeah.
avoid that sort of long extended period. And I felt that way. I feel that way when I do the podcast and I talk about this, where I remember walking into group therapy probably a year after starting recovery the first time. And I was like
Mm-hmm.
25 or something, or 26 at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And now that's like a lifetime. But I remember being in group, and you go around in group and you always say, like, this is how long I've had my eating disorder for. This is the kind of treatment I've done, blah, 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 blah. And I remember that we go around, and some people would say, like, I've had this for 12 years. I've had this for 16 years. I've had this for 10 years. And I remember sitting there in group being like, I'll never I'll never want it to be, I never want to be a person that's had this for 10 years, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a great mindset, right? Like that's a nice, it's a motivating mindset to
Yeah.
be like, I really don't want to become this
Yep.
person in group sitting in here being like, oh, I've had this for 10 years. Fast forward a relapse, a stagnancy, and a strong period of recovery later, right? I was that person being
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm in group. I'm back at this recovery thing. I have been dealing with this for 10 years. I
Mm-hmm.
am done.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a time where I thought that I would not end up being that person. And so the
Mm-hmm.
most that you can kind of intervene with someone or be a beacon of something, it should be as quickly as you can decide to change your
Mm-hmm.
life, the better, because you'll never regret a day in recovery, which is such
Yes.
a difficult thing to believe. When you're, even when your mentor's telling you and you're like, you're not going to regret this. I'm like, well, we'll see, Kathryn. But but you just don't know what you don't know until you know it later. And now it's like, yeah, of course you're not going to regret recovery, because that thing that you thought was your worst nightmare is actually not that bad
I
at the end
know.
of the day. And you're just
I
like, oh,
know.
why didn't I know that? So then you just end up wanting to, actually, maybe here's a question. Do you ever just want to shake people? Because I'm sure that inclination, that's sort of like when you feel like you're not getting through, or that they don't believe you and you just want to be able to communicate. You're just like, I swear to God, this is true. Like, please believe me. I can just
Mm-hmm.
imagine that that's a feeling that I'm going to have as a mentor.
Yes, you do have that. And you also have to really bite your tongue when people say really eating disordery things, when they say they're seeking recovery. And you're like, you can't have it both ways.
Like they're like, oh, I just want to be healthy or something.
Yeah. And it's really hard. It's really hard because you just know that that brain is messing with you. You can't have it both ways. Like you can't, you have to give up some stuff for recovery. And you
Yeah.
really, really have to have faith in the process. So hard. But yeah, you want to shake them. You
Yeah.
want to shake them, and sometimes I think about it, especially when I'm like really, really involved with a mentee, uh like I had one mentee who was going back to work after the summer and was really struggling with um body size, and freaking out about going back to work. And then I'll be out and I'll be like, it's so good that I can just like be out and not think about this. Like that freedom is just, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Like how validating it is for your own recovery, even all these years later. I think that's an incredible
Yep.
thing to hear is that even though you've been in such strong recovery for decades,
Yeah.
it is still validating to hear kind of almost like where you've come from and where you are and be like, life is so good out here.
Yeah. Out here in
Out
the real
here
world.
in the real
Yes.
world with real people.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
true, Maddie. And I'm sure you've experienced this, like even in 2 years of recovery, like all of the different personas that you've had. And I was reflecting back on our time together, and I remember at the very beginning, and you remember this, when you said, how will we know when we're done? Right? And then it's towards the end of our time, when you were like thinking about applying to be a mentor and stuff, we started talking about your social life, your girlfriends, your this, your that. It was like we didn't need to talk about recovery because you were living.
Right. Yeah. I do remember that. I do remember that because it's one of the, I think it's one of the sort of like intake planning questions when you're doing sort of the introductory stuff with your mentor is
Yep.
like, how will you know that you've kind of gotten the most out of this, that you did what you came here to do? And I do remember the
Yeah.
conversation. And I remember at the time being like, oh, when we're not talking about like eating, we're not talking about food, we're not talking about exercise, and we're talking about boys instead.
Exactly.
And it's like we have fully arrived in that place. I'm like, Kathryn, I gotta tell you about boys, honest to God.
It's so true. It's so true. And then the storytelling flipped. And then it was you telling me stories that I was like, what? Really? It happens like that? Yes.
It does.
Are
And
you sure?
it's this entirely organic process that you don't realize in so many things that recovery is like this in so many ways. But
Mhm.
in this way where you don't realize how far you come until you look back to like early conversations and like how
Yep.
desperate I was for answers at that time and
Yep.
how much there was to talk about every single week on our call being like,
Yeah.
here's what I'm doing. And I cannot tell you how valuable you were in the entire journey for me, that I felt like I had somewhere to go for the truth,
Hmm. Hmm.
for as accurate of answers as are humanly possible to give a person in order to
Hmm.
keep them in the game.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't like, I couldn't have done it without you. So I
Oh,
like, I appreciate it so much.
wow. I'm grateful that I was able to be that person for you. I didn't realize the impact that it would have, because this is a new program. So like you're my first graduate.
It really did feel full circle and like graduation,
Mhm.
to have them ask me to come on as a mentor.
Oh, you have so much to bring to the table, and I am so grateful that you are willing to do that, because when you think about helping one person, like think about, I've helped you. Now you talk to your friends differently, you're a recovered person. Now think about you talking to mentees now. How many lives you impact by helping someone achieve that recovery.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's huge.
It is this like, it's this exponential impact and this real like ripple effect of a program like this. And I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is like, how do you see this type of program or this type of peer mentorship gaining traction and having a bigger role in our society, period? Like, how can we do that?
Oh, this is something I think about a lot, Maddie, because demographics, we are a bubble getting older, and it's now the time. Like, I think it's the time for people in my age and stage that we need to give back and we need to build up in any way we can. And so the wise women, the we need as a society to embrace that and harvest it. I
Mm,
think it's what we can do to better support people living in isolation, they're living without nuclear families, they're moving countries for work or for safety, and we need to be the people that help them thrive. And we need to help. My particular thing is, um, especially with young women, giving them lots of adjectives that have nothing to do with how they look.
hmm. Oh my
That
God, what a
sense
powerful
of
statement.
sense of humor, wisdom, resilient, risk taker, great writer, like all of these things. This is what my task is in life, is to inoculate young women with the good things that they bring to the world that have nothing to do with how they look.
What a mission.
Yeah. And I just think I wish, and I try to do that with my peers, where I bring vulnerability. So I'm like, this is how I'm doing things. This is what I've been thinking. This is what I've experienced. And it's like, how can we do this better? Um, how can I give you the courage to like take your experience out into the world and share it and help people live the best life they can in those years where it's hard to live a good life?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's it's so valuable to have people like you who are willing to lend their voice to this. And I think
Mhm.
because of certain demographic differences in the way that certain generations were brought up, the
Mhm.
ability to be vulnerable and about what, when certain people have not even done that sort of deep dive work on themselves. Like, it takes
Yes,
something like an eating disorder or going through something very significant in your life to sort of provide you with the insight and the tools that then propel you into a person that rises above, that has these types of things available and is resilient and able to tap into those for the rest of their lives. But the
Mhm.
fewer people that acknowledge their issues, go through that process, which I think is a generational divide, the
Mhm.
fewer people that are actually going to have that toolbox and then are able to mentor and to do that. So I think that
Yes,
there's going to be like this shift over time where it's going to be fewer, but then that spillover effect generationally, because we have someone to look to and they have someone to look to, and then they have someone to look to, they have someone to look to. It's just going to be this thing that I think grows over time, honestly.
I do too. I absolutely understand what you're saying. My parents spoke to me differently than I speak to my children.
Mm.
They weren't very open. I'm super open. So, like, and because I had the luxury of therapy, I had the luxury of financial stability, these kind of things. So, yeah, I'm hoping that you know because I was able to leverage some of that for me to pass on to the next generation. Then I will hope that my children pass it on to their kids. I'll pass it on to my grandchildren in a different way. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're a much more uh worldly, and maybe that's not the right word, but maybe we're more curious.
Yeah. Dialed in.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it like when you tell people what you do when it comes up that you're a peer mentor and you talk about the program? What are people's responses?
Um with my peers, lots of times
Hmm.
silence.
Interesting.
It's so uncomfortable for people. They just don't want to hear it. La 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 la, I can't hear you. It's it's amazing.
Do you think
It's
it's because it's
amazing.
eating disorders specifically? Because like I notice a shift societally when it comes to things like anxiety or depression, even, or things like that a
Mhm.
little bit more. Do you think that there's still a disproportionate stigma and hesitancy to talk about eating disorders?
I do.
Hmm.
Sadly, I do. I still think a lot of people think it's a choice. And back to diet culture, we live in a world where, oh, it's okay to do that. And then
Yeah.
we call it whatever kind of weird diet people will adopt in the name of health and whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I think it is different because it's eating disorders, and I think the best thing we can do is to continually remind people that an eating disorder is a mental illness, because we're getting much more comfortable talking about mental illness and mental health. So let's just remember that an eating disorder is a mental illness. It's not about the food.
Yes. Amen. So important.
Yeah.
I guess my last question is really about if you were going to say something to someone with an eating disorder who is considering moving into recovery, is considering, oh, maybe if I had a mentor, maybe I'll think about doing that. What would you say to them?
You can't do it alone, and bring in all the resources that you have access to. And it's not easy. So find someone you can trust and bring them into your circle, and be honest and open and vulnerable, and you'll be able to um, find a path. But I absolutely agree with you. I think mentorship is such an important beacon, to use your word, for recovery.
You are the beacon. And we look at you and we're like, okay, if she can do it, maybe I can do it. If she can do it, maybe I can do it. And then on the other side of it, you're like, if I can do it, you can do it. I promise you can do this. Recovery is possible for you too. I know you don't believe me. I know you think you're the exception. It's absolutely possible for you.
Yep, absolutely possible.
Love that. Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time.
You're so welcome.
I'm
so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. It means so much coming from you, because I honestly, I could not have predicted that within 2 years, like almost to the day, to shift from mentee to mentor is wild to me. Absolutely wild to me. Like, it's gone by so fast.
Right.
So yeah.
The days go long though, right?
But oh my God. Fast. In early recovery, I'm on this very couch, just lounging, exhausted.
Yep.
Napping more than anybody has ever napped before. Like, just completely depleted, as like you're literally rebuilding yourself cell by cell. Literally right here is where it all happened. Some propped pillows, couch. A blanket. This couch and there's like a chaise that, that you can't see on video right now, that's on the other side of the room. That chaise has a Maddie sized imprint in it. That was basically like, this is where recovery happened. Like, those days were long. But the years, they flew by. Yeah. So everybody just needs to get themselves a couch and learn how to use it. Get yourself a couch and learn how to use it, and get yourself a peer mentor and learn how to use it. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go directly to peer mentor and also a couch. Oh, but you are like such a good example. You were stubbornly entrenched in an eating disorder, and now you are ready to mentor someone. Yeah. Yes, I should also say my apologies for my like stubborn, very slow to agree, like needing proof, needing answers, needing evidence every step of the damn way. Yeah. Thank you for your patience through that part of the process. I can't imagine that was ever easy. So genteel about it. You were never bombastic about it. You were always just like persistent. Yes. Very diligent in my question asking. Good Lord. Yep. Oh, Maddie. Yep, but you did it. Oh, thank you so much, Kathryn. It has been an
You're
absolute dream to
welcome.
have you as a guest, and I'm so glad that we finally got to make it happen.
Me too. I'm so glad you were waiting for me.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much again, and we will talk to you very soon.
You betcha. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.